Serial murder feels like a modern phenomenon, a chilling product of our complex, often isolating societies. We tend to associate it with the advancements or perhaps the regressions of the modern age. The detailed forensic analysis, the psychological profiling, the media frenzy, these all seem intrinsically linked to our contemporary world. Think Victorian London with its fog-shrouded streets and the terrifying specter of Jack the Ripper, a figure who continues to haunt our collective imagination. Or 20th century America, with their burgeoning FBI files, the development of criminal psychology, and the meticulous construction of psychological profiles to understand the darkest corners of the human mind. We believe we've only recently begun to understand these types of criminals, but history's shadows stretch much further back, casting a long, unsettling darkness that predates our modern understanding of crime. The roots of such evil run deeper than we often imagine. In the sun-scorched highlands of pre-Islamic Yemen, a land of ancient civilizations and forgotten empires, a king named Asad Abu Karib, a ruler who held immense power and commanded the lives of his subjects, better known as Shenatir, the one with earrings, a moniker that hints at the opulence and perhaps the decadence of his reign, became one of the earliest documented serial killers, leaving behind a legacy of terror that echoes through the centuries. His reign in the 5th century Himyarite kingdom, a powerful and influential force in its time, is remembered not for conquest, for the expansion of his kingdom's borders, or for the glory of military victories, but for a series of predatory acts that shocked even his brutal era, a time when life was often cheap and violence was commonplace. Chroniclers like Ibn Hisham and Al-Tabari, meticulous recorders of history and human behavior, preserved his story, ensuring that his dark deeds would not be forgotten. Recognizing that his crimes were a profound violation, a deep betrayal of the very foundations of society and justice, of the sacred trust between ruler and people, the unspoken agreement that those in power must protect and serve those they govern. Shenatir's tale bridges the gap between mythic monsters and modern serial predators, blurring the lines between legend and reality, forcing us to confront the timelessness of systematic evil, the unsettling truth that such darkness can manifest in any era, in any society. How does a king become a monster? How does absolute power corrupt to such a degree that it leads to unspeakable acts? And what finally stops him? What forces, human or divine, can ultimately bring an end to such a reign of terror? The story of Shenatir is a chilling lesson in the abuse of power, a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart, even in those who are entrusted with the greatest responsibility. Shenatir ruled the Himyarite kingdom, a wealthy, sophisticated society at the crossroads of ancient trade. As king, his authority was absolute, his word law, his will unchallenged. The people looked to him for protection and justice, but his power became the very tool of their terror. Historical accounts describe him as cruel and self-obsessed, his nickname, the one with earrings, hinting at vanity and decadence. Unlike a hidden criminal, Shenatir operated in plain sight, turning the royal court and its customs into instruments of predation. The palace, meant to be a place of security, became a lair. His story is not just about tyranny, but about the ultimate betrayal, when the protector becomes the predator. The kingdom's greatest threat was the man on the throne. Shenatir's crimes weren't isolated incidents of madness or fits of rage. They followed a chilling, meticulously crafted pattern, a dark tapestry woven with deceit and brutality. Each act was a calculated step in his reign of terror, a perversion of the very principles he was sworn to uphold. He summoned young noblemen, often barely more than boys, on the cusp of adulthood, their lives stretching before them with promise and potential, to his private chambers, a place of supposed honor and privilege that concealed a horrifying truth. These were not meetings of state, nor were they opportunities for mentorship. Under the guise of royal favor, a twisted mockery of the trust placed in him. He presented it as an opportunity, a chance to gain influence and standing within the court. Families, bound by tradition and the rigid social structures of the time, could not refuse a direct summons from the king. To do so would be seen as an act of treason, a challenge to the crown itself. Alone behind closed doors, the king assaulted and murdered his victims, silencing their cries and extinguishing their potential. Disposing of their bodies in a manner that served as a public warning, a chilling display of his absolute power and the consequences of defiance. The royal summons, once a mark of honor and a symbol of upward mobility, became a death sentence, a chilling premonition of doom. Noble families lived in terror, their lives overshadowed by fear and uncertainty. Trapped between the agonizing choice of rebellion, with its inherent risks and compliance, which meant potentially sacrificing their sons. Shenatir twisted the very fabric of his society, corrupting its values and undermining its foundations, using its most sacred customs and traditions as bait to lure his unsuspecting victims into his deadly trap. His systematic abuse of power was not random violence or impulsive acts, but a calculated, repetitive compulsion, a dark ritual played out with chilling precision. The king's palace, once a symbol of strength and stability, became a place of dread and whispered nightmares, and the kingdom's rites of passage, meant to celebrate life and growth, were transformed into rituals of death and despair. This was serial predation, a calculated hunt for the innocent, executed with the full weight of a monarch's authority, a terrifying demonstration of absolute power gone horribly wrong. Shenatir's motives were not political but deeply personal, a toxic mix of sadism, insecurity, and a lust for domination. By targeting the sons of the nobility, he attacked the future of the kingdom and asserted his control over its most powerful families. Each murder was a message. No one, not even the elite, was safe from his whims. Some suggest his violence reflected internal conflicts, a rejection of his culture's ideals of manhood. Ultimately, his crimes were about power for its own sake, the thrill of command, violation, and impunity. He was not a statesman but a predator with a crown. The throne gave him the stage for his pathology. Shenatir's victims were the young, promising sons of Himyar's nobility, the future leaders of the realm. Their youth and status made them both symbols of hope and targets for the king's predation. The number of victims is lost to history, but the pattern was sustained and notorious, casting a shadow over the kingdom's elite. Families faced an impossible choice: defy the king and risk annihilation, or comply and lose their sons. The terror was silent and suffocating, compounded by shame and the violation of cultural values. These were not political enemies but innocents chosen for their promise. The king's crimes dismantled not just families, but the very future of Himyar. The trauma was collective, the loss immeasurable. The kingdom's brightest hopes became casualties of a ruler's pathology. Shenatir's story survives thanks to early Islamic historians like Ibn Hisham and al-Tabari. They recorded his reign as a cautionary tale, a symbol of the moral decay that Islam sought to overcome. The accounts, shaped by oral tradition, are sparse but consistent. A king who lured, assaulted, and killed young men, and met a violent end. These chronicles are not forensic records but powerful folk memory. The scribes recognized the pattern of serial predation, even without modern terminology. Their work preserves one of history's earliest cases of systematic evil. Shenatir's crimes became a legend, warning future generations about the dangers of unchecked power. The reign of Shenatir, a period marked by tyranny and oppression, had finally reached its end. His rule, characterized by cruelty and disregard for the well-being of his people, left a scar upon the kingdom. The once proud land of Himyar groaned under the weight of his injustice. It was during this dark time that a young man emerged, a figure named Yusuf Asar Yatha'ar. History remembers him as a beacon of hope in an era of despair. Yusuf, possibly a royal relative himself, though the exact details of his lineage remain shrouded in the mists of time, was about to change the course of history. He refused to be another victim of Shenatir's cruelty, another name added to the long list of the unjustly persecuted. He chose defiance over submission. When the summons arrived, an official decree commanding his presence at the palace, Yusuf understood the peril he faced. Yusuf knew the fate that awaited him, the likely end to his life if he walked blindly into the lion's den. He was aware of the king's reputation for ruthlessness, but instead of submitting to what seemed like an inevitable doom, he devised a plan, a daring strategy born of desperation and courage. He would obey the summons, presenting himself before the king as commanded, seemingly compliant. But he would come armed, prepared to defend himself against the tyrant's treachery. Concealing a dagger beneath his robes, a small but deadly instrument of defiance, he prepared to face his destiny. Yusuf entered the king's chambers, stepping into the heart of the palace where power and danger resided. He played the part of the dutiful subject, bowing low before the throne, masking his true intentions with a show of respect. Alone with the tyrant in the opulent throne room, the air thick with tension and unspoken threats, he waited for the opportune moment to strike, like a coiled spring ready to unleash its pent-up energy. This was a turning point, a moment of profound significance that would determine the fate of a kingdom. It was a shift from passive suffering, where the people of Himyar had endured the king's cruelty in silence, to active resistance, a bold challenge to his authority. Yusuf's resolve was not just for himself, not merely a desperate act of self-preservation. It was for all the victims who had come before him, those who had suffered and died under Shenatir's oppressive rule. He carried the weight of a kingdom's grief on his shoulders, the collective sorrow of a people yearning for freedom, and he carried hope, the flickering flame of a better future, a vision of justice and peace for Himyar. The confrontation that was about to unfold would decide not just his fate, whether he lived or died in that chamber, but the future of Himyar, the destiny of its people, hung in the balance, dependent on the actions of this one courageous man. The stage was set for a final reckoning, a dramatic showdown between a tyrant and a hero, a moment that would echo through the ages. In the king's private chamber, Yusuf struck when Shenatir moved to attack. A brief, violent struggle ended with the tyrant dead, killed by his intended victim. Yusuf emerged as a liberator, not a murderer. News of the king's death brought relief and celebration. The cycle of terror was broken. The noble families hailed Yusuf as a hero, and he was chosen as the new king. Under his rule, Himyar underwent a dramatic transformation, officially converting to Judaism, a break from the past. Shenatir's death marked the end of a dark era and the beginning of renewal. The legend endures, the tyrant overthrown, the hero elevated, and justice restored. The kingdom's future was reclaimed from the shadows. Shenatir's story endures as a chilling reminder that systematic evil is not bound by time or culture. His crimes, preserved by early historians, reveal how absolute power can become a tool of predation. The palace, the royal summons, symbols of trust, became instruments of terror. His legacy is not one of policy, but of cruelty and fear. Yet the story is also one of resistance and justice, a society held hostage, then liberated by courage. Shenatir is remembered not for his rule but for the darkness he brought, and the hero who ended it. His tale warns us, sometimes the greatest monsters wear crowns.